Okay, this is the first set of notes for AP Statistics, and we're going to be taking on some of the science and art of data. Okay, so today's lesson is basically just about kind of like establishing some early vocabulary so that we're using the same terms and we're also using the same terms that the College Board is using. So the first term that we want to actually use here is statistics. Okay, so we're going to formally define this as both a science, so there is a science aspect to this, and an art. And we're basically taking on a couple of major activities. One is a place where we collect data, so it's how do we gather it. Two, how do we analyze it, right? So this would be the descriptive statistic end of things, is analyzing data that we've collected. And finally, we're going to make inferences or draw conclusions about that data. Right, so that's what we're going to call drawing inferences. That gets us into the inferential side of statistics. So analysis is the descriptive side, and drawing conclusions is ultimately going to be the inferential side. Okay, so statistics is both. It's a science and an art, because on the science side, you're kind of like making observations, you're doing experiments. On the art side, you have to be somewhat knowledgeable about the field, almost like it's a craft, where you get a certain set of tools, and you have to know which tool to apply in which space to get the desired outcome. Okay, so in statistics, you always have like this dichotomy between individuals and the population. And so we're going to start on the individual side of things. Okay, so an individual is, so it sounds like it's a person, but I'm going to say that this is an object, right? It could be a person, it could be an animal, it could be a thing. It's basically the subject of measurement, whatever it is that we're going to measure or analyze, but it's only one of them. So there may be a sense of, like, you have a whole population of these individuals, and we're going to measure each one as an individual, right? So that's like the first level that we're going to go after here, is what are individuals. All right, so give me a moment, and I'm going to clear the screen, and we're going to keep going a little bit. Okay, so when we measure an individual, we need some containers to put information in. So we're going to call these containers variables, right? And that's not too different from algebra and mathematics. A variable is a container. Usually for variables we use like capital letters here, so like X, big X. Oftentimes I'll write it with like big bars so that we know it's a capital X. So it's something that can take different values for different individuals. Okay, so like you could have a variable for height, or you could have a variable for GPA, or you could have a variable for the color of the car. These are all different types of variables, right? So we break the types of variables into two groups. We have ones that we call categorical, and we have variables that we call quantitative. And sometimes these are referred to as qualitative variables. It depends on like who's writing, but I believe that the AP uses the term categorical versus quantitative. Things that are categorical are they're things that literally put individuals into groups. So like at Garrison Forest in the upper school, we have a categorical variable for your class year, right? So we have 9s, 10s, juniors, and seniors. Those are categorical groups. Or you might have like people who are left-handed, people who are right-handed, sports cars versus family cars versus utility vehicles. These are all, excuse me, categorical types of data. Quantitative variables specifically are variables that take a number. And there's different levels of measurement, and we'll get into that at some point. But these could either be a count, how many, right? Or a measurement, how much, right? So like how many people are standing in line is a count, as opposed to how much money do you have, right? That's a measurement. Or like it's a weird one, but like a measurement would be height. We actually get into how much height do they have. It seems odd to say that using our language, but that's actually a measurement reality. And we will get into, so like counts are discrete and measurements are continuous, right? So counts are things where like you can't have half of something. Like you can't like have half of a cat, right? So if you're going to count cats, you don't say like 2.35. That doesn't make sense. Whereas a measurement, oftentimes you do have the ability to have something that is continuous as opposed to discrete. Okay, so cool. Two types of variables: categorical, putting individuals into groups; quantitative, variables that take numbers, right? So one takes a group name, the other takes a numeric value. Okay, so we're going to start into a little bit, just tip our toe a little bit into data analysis today, right? And one of the ways that we talk about data is we ask about its distribution. How is the data distributed, right? So oftentimes we're going to actually talk about this like using the colloquialism shape. This is the shape of the data, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to say, all right, what values, so you're going to look at like what values does the variable take, and how often does it take that value, right? So this is the values versus, and this is going to be what we call a frequency, right? So what are the possible values? What is the range of values, right? As opposed to the frequency. And if you kind of like think this through and you put the values this way and you put the frequency this way, then you're going to see, like if you try to build like a bar graph or a histogram or something like that, you're going to get a shape of the data, right? So some sort of distribution. A common shape that we get is a bell curve, all right, which is what we call a normal curve. You don't need to know this at this point, right? And this is pretty common because a lot of things that we measure have what we call central tendency, right? So something that has central tendency, the middle values are going to be happening more frequently than the exterior values. So like things like height and weight and IQ have central tendency and tend to have this bell-shaped distribution that's symmetric. Now, not everything has that type of shape, but you know, it's an example of a distribution. So we're going to do a lot more with that later on in the course. So let's get into some like just rules of thumb for doing data analysis that we're going to look at next here. Okay, so what makes statistics is that we actually move from individuals to um, the sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself there. Um, what we start here with is looking at variables, right? So, like, we're going to start by just looking at one variable on something. And once you have a handle of how that variable works and how it's distributed, then you might get into something where you're looking at the relationship between variables. Okay, so you're going to find in the course here that we're going to start looking at like just how do we examine a variable and make sense of it and be able to talk about it and things like that. And then we're going to look at like specifically two variables at a time. Like, and that's going to be the scope of this. So like now folks who do like, industrial size statistics are doing multivariate situations, and that gets a little bit complicated, and it's a little like this course is limited to situations with one and two variable realities, but a lot of what we're going to learn here can be fairly easily um, extricated out to larger and larger sets of variables. Okay. Uh, the other thing is that you want to move from pictures, 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 yeah, to numbers. Okay, so the idea here is that pictures are really the way that our brain tends to make sense of things. They're much more concrete and help us to visualize. Numbers are abstractions, right? So we get a sense of like what does the thing look like as far as its distribution, right? So what is its shape? And we're going to start using words like symmetric or skewed or things like that to be able to talk about it pictorially. And then numbers is like when we get into hardcore analysis here, like we're going to get into like what is its center, right? And that's going to get us to things like the mean or the median, or what is its range, or what is its standard deviation. And this is going to get us into more numeric analysis. And that's kind of like the flow, is that you like move from pictures to numbers, but you always start by kind of looking at the picture and getting a feel for it. And that's where the art comes in. It's like the ability to look at the pictures and get a feel for the data before you dive in and start trying to make numeric sense of it. All right, so just kind of like summarizing what we talked about today. Statistics is a field of study that's both an art and a science. The major concept here is going to be examining individuals and doing that to give values to variables, whether they be categorical or quantitative, right? Categories or measurements or counts. And then we will get into how does that like how do we use those variables to kind of get a distribution, and that starts bringing in this idea of frequency into the game. And then we're going to ultimately learn how to turn all of that into being able to make inferences about a population of which these individuals are part of. All right, so that's today. Be ready with like either good questions at the beginning of class, or be ready to answer good questions at the beginning of class on this stuff. All right, so we'll see you next class.